I was standing on my dock at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the water gold when I heard the truck rumbling down my private road. The piece shattered like glass. I turned to see a white pickup with Meadowbrook Estates HOA emblazoned on the side pulling up to my property, followed by a flatbed trailer that could only mean one thing. They were coming for my boat. My name is Nathan Garrison, and I'd lived on this property in northern Minnesota for 3 years. When I bought the place, it came with something most people would kill for, a private lake. Not lakefront property, not a shared lake. The entire body of water, all 42 acres of it, sat squarely within my property lines. The deed was crystal clear, and I'd paid a premium for that exclusivity. A woman emerged from the truck, her highlighted blonde hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. She wore khaki capris and a polo shirt with the HOA logo, and she carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. Behind her, 2 men in their 20s climbed out, looking uncomfortable. "Nathan Garrison?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut steel. "That's me." I set my coffee down on the dock railing. "And you are?" "Brenda Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I'm here regarding multiple violations of our community standards." She glanced at her clipboard. "Specifically, the unauthorized watercraft currently docked at your property." I followed her gaze to my boat, a beautiful 24-foot bayliner that I'd saved for years to buy. She sat pristine in the water, white hull gleaming in the morning sun. "Unauthorized by whom?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "By the HOA board. All watercraft must be approved and registered with the association. You failed to do so despite 3 written notices." She thrust a paper at me. "This is your final warning. Since you've refused to comply, we're exercising our right to remove the violation from community property." I didn't take the paper. "Community property? Brenda, this is my private lake. It's entirely within my property boundaries." Her smile was condescending. "Mr. Garrison, when you purchased your home in Meadowbrook Estates, you agreed to abide by all HOA regulations. That includes any bodies of water within the development." "Show me where it says that in my deed." She tapped her clipboard. "It's in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Section 12, subsection 4. All recreational waters fall under HOA jurisdiction for the safety and aesthetic standards of the community." Recreational waters that are communal, maybe. This lake is private property. My property. I pulled out my phone. "I'm looking at my survey right now. Every drop of water in that lake belongs to me. The property line goes around the entire perimeter." Brenda's expression hardened. "That's irrelevant. The CCRs supersede individual property claims within the development. Now, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Either you move that boat to approved storage, or we remove it for you. The towing and storage fees will be added to your account." One of the young guys behind her shifted uncomfortably. "Madam, if he's saying the lake is on his property." "Tyler, we've been through this," Brenda snapped. "The HOA has legal authority over all community standards. That's why we exist. Mr. Garrison knew what he was signing up for when he bought here." "Actually, I didn't buy in Meadowbrook Estates," I said. "I bought this property 3 years ago, before your development existed. My house was already here. The only reason I'm technically within your boundaries is because the developer built around me after I refused to sell." That got her attention, but she recovered quickly. "Then you should have objected during the incorporation period. By not filing a formal objection, you're considered part of the HOA by default. Minnesota law is very clear on this." I'd heard enough. "Brenda, I'm going to say this once. That boat isn't going anywhere. This lake is mine. The water is mine. The fish in it are mine. You have zero authority here." She pulled out her phone. "Tyler, Marcus, start hooking up the trailer. Mr. Garrison, I'm documenting your refusal to cooperate. You'll be hearing from our attorney." The 2 guys looked at each other, then at me, then back at Brenda. Neither moved toward my dock. "Don't make me write you up for insubordination," Brenda said, her voice rising. "That boat is a community violation, and we're removing it." "Step 1 foot on my dock, and I'm calling the sheriff," I said. "This is private property, and you're trespassing. We have legal authority to enforce HOA regulations." "Not on property you don't have jurisdiction over." I was already dialing. Sheriff's Department? Yes, I need someone at 4782 Lakeshore Drive. I have people on my property trying to take my boat without permission. Brenda's face flushed red. You can't do this. I am the HOA president. We have rules. And I have property rights. Your rules end at my property line. I kept the phone to my ear. Yes, I'll stay on the line. Thank you. She jabbed a finger at me. This isn't over. The board will hear about this. We will take action. Looking forward to it. Brenda spun on her heel and marched back to her truck, barking at Tyler and Marcus to get in. They climbed in quickly, and the truck peeled out, kicking up gravel from my driveway. I watched them go, then gave the dispatcher my statement and waited for the deputy to arrive. Deputy Chen showed up 20 minutes later, a calm woman in her 40s who'd been with the county for years. I'd met her before at a community barbecue in town. She took my statement, examined my property documents on her tablet, and shook her head. Mr. Garrison, your deed is pretty clear. This entire lake is within your boundaries. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over private water rights. That's what I told her. Did they actually attempt to take the boat? They would have if I hadn't stopped them, brought a flatbed trailer and everything. She made notes. I'll file this report. If they come back, call us immediately. What they attempted could constitute theft or criminal trespass, depending on how far they go. She looked out at the lake. Beautiful property, by the way. Must be nice having your own lake. It is. That's why I'm not letting anyone mess with it. After she left, I spent the rest of the morning researching Minnesota property law and HOA regulations. What I found was interesting. While HOAs do have broad authority over common areas and even some aspects of private property within their boundaries, they can't supersede water rights that were established before the HOA existed. My deed predated the Meadowbrook Estates development by 7 years. The lake and all associated water rights were explicitly mine. I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer, who'd handled my property purchase. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. Nathan, they don't have a leg to stand on, she said when I finished. Your water rights are ironclad. They can't touch your boat, your dock, or anything else on that lake. The fact that they tried to repo your property is actually actionable. You could pursue charges. What I want is for them to leave me alone. Then I'll send them a cease and desist letter today. Clear, simple, and legally binding. If they ignore it, we escalate. Thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate it. One more thing. Check your mail carefully over the next few weeks. HOAs like this often retaliate with fines and violation notices. Document everything. If this goes to court, we want a paper trail of harassment. She wasn't wrong. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Inside was a notice of violation for unauthorized water recreation, a fine of $500, and a demand that I remove my boat within 7 days or face daily penalties of $100. Attached was a copy of the CCRs with Section 12, Subsection 4 highlighted. I photographed everything and forwarded it to Jennifer. Her response came within an hour. Escalating. They just made this worse for themselves. The next board meeting was in 2 weeks, and I decided to attend. If Brenda wanted a fight, I'd bring it to her doorstep. The meetings were held in the community center, a bland building near the development's entrance. I arrived 15 minutes early and took a seat in the back row. About 30 residents filtered in, most looking bored or resigned. Brenda sat at the front table with 4 other board members, all middle-aged and self-important. She spotted me immediately, and her expression curdled. The meeting started with standard business, budget reports, landscaping contracts, a proposal to repaint the community sign. Then, Brenda cleared her throat and looked directly at me. Before we move to new business, I need to address an ongoing violation. Mr. Nathan Garrison of 4782 Lakeshore Drive has repeatedly refused to comply with HOA regulations regarding his boat. Despite multiple notices and warnings, he continues to defy the board's authority. A few heads turned my way. I raised my hand. Mr. Garrison, you'll have a chance to speak during the public comment period, Brenda said dismissively. Actually, Brenda, since you're talking about me, I think I should respond now. Her jaw tightened. That's not how we conduct meetings. Let him speak, said one of the other board members, a gray-haired man whose nameplate read, Richard Foster. If we're discussing his property, he should have a chance to respond. Brenda looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but she nodded curtly. Fine. Mr. Garrison, you have 2 minutes. I stood up. Thanks. I just want to clarify something for everyone here. My property, including the lake, was purchased in 2019. The Meadowbrook Estates development was incorporated in 2021. My deed, which predates your HOA, clearly states that I own the entire lake and all associated water rights. The HOA has no jurisdiction over my private lake, my boat, or anything else on my property. I've received legal counsel confirming this, and my attorney has sent a cease and desist letter regarding the harassment and attempted theft of my boat. Murmurs rippled through the room. Brenda's face turned scarlet. That's absurd. When the development incorporated, all properties within the boundaries fell under HOA jurisdiction. That's how these things work. Not when those properties have pre-existing private water rights, I said. Minnesota law is very clear about this. You can't retroactively claim jurisdiction over resources that were legally established before your organization existed. Richard Foster leaned forward. Brenda, is this true? Does his property predate the HOA? That's irrelevant. The CCRs apply to all residents. It's completely relevant, I said. You can't enforce CCRs on property rights that were established years before those CCRs existed. That's not how property law works. Another board member, a woman named Susan, flipped through papers. Brenda, do we have documentation showing that Mr. Garrison's property falls under our jurisdiction? Because if what he's saying is true, of course we have documentation. Every property in the development is covered. But Brenda's voice had an edge of panic now. Then show it, I said. Show everyone here the legal basis for your claim over my private lake. Brenda fumbled with her papers, her confidence cracking. We have the incorporation documents. We have the development map. His property is clearly within our boundaries. Being within your geographic boundaries doesn't mean you have jurisdiction over pre-existing private property rights, I said. My attorney can explain this to your attorney if you'd like, or we can settle this in court. Your choice. The room erupted in conversation. Several residents started asking questions, and I could see other board members looking uncomfortable. Richard Foster called for order. Brenda, I think we need to table this discussion until we can get legal clarification, he said. If Mr. Garrison's property rights predate the HOA, we may not have the authority we think we do. We absolutely have the authority, Brenda insisted. This is exactly the kind of defiance that undermines everything we've built here. If we let one person ignore the rules, everyone will. We're not talking about rules, I interrupted. We're talking about legal property rights. Big difference. The meeting devolved from there. Half the room wanted to discuss my situation further, while Brenda tried desperately to move on to other business. Finally, Richard Foster called for a recess and suggested the board consult with their attorney before taking any further action regarding my property. I left feeling cautiously optimistic, but I should have known Brenda wouldn't give up that easily. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a notice taped to my front door. This one wasn't about the boat. It was a violation for unapproved exterior paint color, improper mailbox placement, and non-compliant driveway material. Each violation carried a $200 fine. I stared at the notice, anger building in my chest. My house was painted a perfectly normal shade of gray that matched half the houses in the area. My mailbox was standard issue, same as everyone else's, and my gravel driveway had been there since before the HOA existed. I called Jennifer again. They're retaliating, she said immediately. This is textbook HOA harassment. Take photos of everything they cited, then take photos of similar features on other properties in the development. We're going to demonstrate that they're selectively enforcing rules to punish you. I spent the next evening driving through Meadowbrook Estates with my camera. Sure enough, dozens of houses had similar gray paint. Mailboxes were placed in various locations with no apparent standard, and at least 20 properties had gravel driveways identical to mine. Jennifer filed a formal complaint with the state's HOA regulatory board, citing harassment and selective enforcement. She also sent another letter to the HOA, this time threatening legal action if the harassment continued. Brenda's response arrived via certified mail, a notice that my HOA dues were delinquent and that I owed 3 years of back payments plus late fees, totaling $8,000. The letter stated that if I didn't pay within 30 days, they would place a lien on my property. That's when I knew this was going to court. Jennifer filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, seeking a declaratory judgment that my property was not subject to their jurisdiction. We also filed a countersuit for harassment, attempted theft, and abuse of power. The initial hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Brenda escalated. I started receiving daily violation notices for increasingly absurd things. Grass height exceeds standards when my lawn was perfectly mowed, outdoor storage violation for a garden hose on a hanger, unapproved landscaping for native wildflowers that had grown on my property for years. Each notice came with a fine. By the time our court date arrived, the HOA claimed I owed over $15,000 in various penalties. The hearing was held in the Itasca County Courthouse on a gray morning in late October. Jennifer and I arrived early and sat at the plaintiff's table. Brenda arrived with the HOA's attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Mercer. Judge Patricia Kowalski presided, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal BS. She reviewed the case materials, then looked up at both parties. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," she said. "Mr. Garrison owns property with a private lake. The lake is entirely within his property boundaries. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA was incorporated after Mr. Garrison purchased his property. The HOA is now claiming jurisdiction over Mr. Garrison's lake and attempting to enforce rules regarding his boat. Is that accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor," Jennifer said. "Your Honor, the situation is more nuanced than that," Mercer began. "When Meadowbrook Estates incorporated, all properties within the development boundaries became subject to HOA governance. This is standard practice and legally established. Mr. Garrison's refusal to comply with community standards has created ongoing violations that affect property values and community aesthetics." Judge Kowalski looked unimpressed. "Counselor, does your client have any documentation establishing jurisdiction over water rights that predate the HOA's existence?" Mercer shifted. "Your Honor, the CCRs clearly state that all recreational waters within the development fall under HOA authority." "That's not what I asked. Do you have documentation showing that Mr. Garrison's private lake, which he owned before your client existed, is subject to HOA jurisdiction?" "The incorporation of the development established—" "Counselor," Judge Kowalski's voice was sharp. "Yes or no? Do you have legal documentation establishing jurisdiction over pre-existing private water rights?" Mercer hesitated. "We have the development incorporation papers and the CCRs, Your Honor, neither of which supersede established property rights." She turned to Jennifer. "Ms. Chen, what are you seeking from this court?" Jennifer stood. "Your Honor, we're seeking a declaratory judgment that Mr. Garrison's property, including his private lake, is not subject to HOA jurisdiction. We're also seeking an injunction against further harassment and an order to void all fines and penalties levied against Mr. Garrison." "And the countersuit?" "We're seeking damages for attempted theft, harassment, and abuse of power. The HOA has engaged in a pattern of retaliation against Mr. Garrison for asserting his legal property rights." Judge Kowalski reviewed the documents again, her expression growing more severe. "Mr. Mercer, I'm looking at photos of violation notices your client sent to Mr. Garrison. Grass height, garden hose storage, wildflowers. Are you seriously arguing these are legitimate violations?" "Your Honor, the HOA has standards that all residents must meet. And I'm looking at comparative photos showing that dozens of other properties have identical features with no violations issued." She flipped through more papers. "This looks like targeted harassment to me." "Your Honor, the board takes its responsibilities seriously. Mr. Garrison's defiance set a poor precedent. Mr. Garrison's assertion of his legal property rights is not defiance. Counselor, it's his right as a property owner." Judge Kowalski set the papers down. "Here's my ruling. Mr. Garrison's property deed clearly predates the HOA. His water rights are explicit and documented. The HOA has no jurisdiction over his private lake or any watercraft on that lake. All fines and penalties are void. The HOA is permanently enjoined from attempting to enforce any regulations regarding Mr. Garrison's lake, boat, or dock. Mercer stood up. Your Honor, we'd like to appeal. You can try, but I doubt you'll succeed. The law is quite clear on this matter. She looked at Brenda, who was staring at the table with clenched fists. Ms. Patterson, let me be very clear. The violations you've levied against Mr. Garrison appear to be retaliatory and vindictive. If I see any further harassment complaints, I will hold you and your board in contempt. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, Brenda said through gritted teeth. As for the countersuit, I'm ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Garrison's legal fees and $3,000 in damages for harassment. Consider yourselves fortunate I'm not awarding more. She banged her gavel. Court is adjourned. I felt the tension drain from my shoulders. Jennifer squeezed my arm, grinning. Across the room, Brenda was having a heated, whispered conversation with Mercer, her face red with rage. As we left the courthouse, I expected that to be the end of it. The judge had ruled, the law was clear, and the HOA had been put in its place. But I'd underestimated Brenda's stubbornness and her inability to accept defeat. 3 weeks after the ruling, I was working from home when I heard engines on the lake. I looked out my window and saw 2 jet skis racing across the water, kicking up spray and noise. I didn't recognize the riders, and they definitely hadn't asked permission to use my lake. I grabbed my jacket and headed down to the dock. The jet skis circled the lake several more times before finally pulling up to my dock. The riders were 2 teenagers, maybe 16 or 17, both grinning. Hey, I called out, this is private property, you can't be here. One of them, a kid with bleached hair, laughed. Relax, dude. Ms. Patterson said we could use the community lake. It's all good. My jaw tightened. This isn't a community lake. It's my private lake. Ms. Patterson has no authority here. The other kid, wearing a twins cap, frowned. She's the HOA president. She said all the water in Meadowbrook is community property. She's wrong, and she knows it. There was a court ruling 3 weeks ago. This lake is mine. You need to leave. Bleached hair revved his jet ski. Whatever, man. We paid for passes and everything. You got a problem. Take it up with the HOA. They roared off, spraying water in their wake. I was already dialing Jennifer. She's doing what? Jennifer's voice rose in disbelief. Selling lake passes, telling people they can use my lake. Brenda's completely ignoring the court order. That's contempt. Get me evidence, photos, videos, anything. If she's willfully violating a court order, Judge Kowalski is going to come down on her hard. Over the next week, I documented everything. The teenagers came back twice more, along with a family in a pontoon boat and a couple in kayaks. Each time, they insisted Brenda had given them permission to use the community lake. Each time, I had to explain that it was private property and they needed to leave. Most complied, but some argued, insisting the HOA president wouldn't lie to them. I also discovered that Brenda was advertising the lake on the Meadowbrook Estates website, listing it as a community amenity. The page included photos of my lake, my dock, and instructions for purchasing recreation passes. Jennifer filed an emergency motion for contempt, attaching all my evidence. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. This time, when we walked into court, Judge Kowalski looked furious before anyone even spoke. Ms. Patterson, she said, her voice cold, can you explain to me why you're selling access to property this court explicitly ruled you have no jurisdiction over? Brenda stood, her chin raised defiantly. Your Honor, the board discussed your ruling and determined that while Mr. Garrison owns the land around the lake, the water itself is a natural resource that should be available to the community. The courtroom went silent. Even Mercer, the HOA's attorney, looked stunned. You determined what? Judge Kowalski's voice was dangerously quiet. The board voted. We believe the water rights should be shared. It's not fair that one person controls an entire lake while the rest of the community, Ms. Patterson. The judge's voice cracked like a whip. I issued a court order. I didn't issue a suggestion. I didn't issue a recommendation. I issued a legally binding order that you are now admitting you deliberately violated. Your Honor, with all respect, we believe the ruling was... What you believe is irrelevant. You are in contempt of court. Bailiff, please take Ms. Patterson into custody. Brenda's eyes went wide. What? You can't? I absolutely can. You willfully violated a court order. That's contempt. Judge Kowalski turned to Mercer. Counselor, I suggest you advise the rest of the board to immediately cease all activity related to Mr. Garrison's lake. If I find out anyone else is involved in this scheme, they'll join Ms. Patterson in a cell. The bailiff approached Brenda, who had gone pale. Your Honor, please. I didn't realize. You knew exactly what you were doing. You'll be held for 72 hours. After that, you'll appear before me again, and we'll discuss further penalties. She looked at me. Mr. Garrison, I apologize that you've had to deal with this ongoing harassment. I'm issuing a permanent injunction against the HOA regarding your property. If anyone from that organization sets foot on your land or attempts to use your lake, they'll face criminal trespass charges. Thank you, Your Honor. Brenda was led away, still protesting. The other board members in attendance looked shell-shocked. Mercer quickly approached Jennifer. Ms. Chen, on behalf of the HOA, I'd like to formally apologize for this situation. The board will comply fully with all court orders going forward. They better, Jennifer said, because if they don't, we'll be back here again, and next time we'll be seeking much more than damages. The story made the local news. HOA president jailed for contempt, read the headline in the Duluth News-Tribune. The article detailed Brenda's repeated violations of the court order and her arrest. Community reaction was mixed. Some residents supported her, claiming I was being selfish by not sharing the lake. Others were appalled by her actions and concerned about the legal liability she'd created for the HOA. Brenda served her 3 days and was released, but the board voted to remove her as president. Richard Foster took over, and one of his first actions was to issue a formal apology to me and a promise that the HOA would respect the court's ruling. I thought that would finally be the end of it. But Brenda wasn't done. She couldn't let it go. I came home from the grocery store on a Saturday afternoon to find my dock vandalized. The wood was spray-painted with red graffiti. Selfish, share the lake, and community water. My boat's cover had been slashed, and someone had tried to puncture the hull with what looked like a screwdriver. They hadn't succeeded, but there were deep gouges in the fiberglass. I called the sheriff's department immediately. Deputy Chen arrived with another officer, and they documented everything. The vandalism was clearly targeted and personal. Any idea who might have done this? Deputy Chen asked. I have a pretty good guess. I told her about the ongoing situation with Brenda. Given the contempt ruling and her recent arrest, she'd be the obvious suspect. But we'll need evidence. She examined the graffiti. We'll check for fingerprints and see if any neighbors have security cameras that might have caught something. 2 days later, I got a call from Deputy Chen. Mr. Garrison? We got her. A neighbor 3 houses down has a camera that covers part of the road to your property. We have clear footage of Brenda Patterson driving to your place at 2 a.m. with a bag of spray paint. She's being charged with criminal mischief and vandalism. The arrest happened quickly. Brenda was booked and released on bail, but the charges were serious. Combined with her contempt citation, she was looking at potential jail time. The preliminary hearing was a circus. Brenda showed up with a different attorney, a younger man who tried to argue that his client was under emotional distress due to the ongoing community conflict. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Reyes, wasn't buying it. Your Honor, Ms. Patterson has engaged in a sustained campaign of harassment against Mr. Garrison. When the court ruled against her, she violated that ruling. When she was held in contempt, she escalated to property destruction. This isn't emotional distress. This is a pattern of criminal behavior. The judge, a different one this time, agreed. Brenda was bound over for trial. She pleaded guilty eventually, probably on her lawyer's advice. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in county jail, with 3 months suspended, and ordered her to pay restitution for the damage to my dock and boat. She was also placed on probation for 2 years. The HOA, meanwhile, was in chaos. The publicity had been brutal, and several board members resigned. Property values in Meadowbrook estates dipped as potential buyers learned about the dysfunctional leadership. Richard Foster and the remaining board members worked to rebuild trust, but the damage was done. I received a formal letter from the new board, signed by Richard and the other members, apologizing for everything that had happened and confirming that my property rights would be fully respected going forward. They also voted to remove the lake from any community marketing materials and to send a notice to all residents clarifying that my lake was private property and not available for community use. It took months for things to fully settle down. Brenda served her time and moved away after her release, unable to face the community after her very public downfall. The HOA eventually stabilized under new leadership, and the harassment stopped completely. My dock was repaired, my boat was fixed, and I installed security cameras around my property just in case anyone else got any ideas. But the lake was finally, truly peaceful again. On a warm evening in July, a full year after the initial confrontation, I was sitting on my dock with a beer, watching the sunset over the water. My phone rang. It was Richard Foster. "Nathan, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all. What's up?" "I wanted to give you a heads up. The board is voting next week on a proposal to formally exclude your property from the HOA. Since you predate the development anyway, and given everything that happened, it seems like the right thing to do. You'd no longer receive any HOA communications, and you'd have zero obligations to the association." I smiled. "Richard, that sounds perfect. I thought you'd appreciate it. It should have been done from the beginning. Your property was never really part of the HOA in any meaningful way. We're just making it official." "I appreciate that, really. It's the least we can do after everything you went through. Brenda's behavior was inexcusable, and the whole board shares some responsibility for not reining her in sooner." We talked for a few more minutes, and I hung up feeling genuinely relieved. The formal separation from the HOA happened 2 weeks later. I received a certificate of non-membership and updated documentation showing that my property was officially outside HOA jurisdiction. The whole experience had been exhausting, expensive, and infuriating, but it had also taught me something important about standing up for your rights, even when it would be easier to just go along with unreasonable demands. Brenda had counted on me backing down, on the hassle being too much trouble. She'd been wrong. I still see people from Meadowbrook Estates occasionally when I'm in town. Most are friendly, some apologetic about the whole situation. A few still give me dirty looks, probably believing I should have just shared the lake. But I don't lose sleep over it. The lake is mine, legally and completely, and no HOA president, however determined, can change that. The water sparkled in the fading light, perfectly calm and perfectly private. I raised my beer in a silent toast to property rights, stubborn determination, and the satisfaction of being completely, legally, undeniably right. A boat would occasionally pass by on the larger public lake about a mile away, the sound of motors drifting faintly across the distance. But my lake remained untouched, except by my presence, exactly as it should be. I thought about all the documentation I'd accumulated over the past year: court orders, violation notices, photos, videos, legal filings. It filled an entire filing cabinet in my office. Part of me wanted to throw it all away, to forget the stress and anger, but Jennifer had advised me to keep everything, just in case. "HOAs have long memories," she'd said. "Even with new leadership, there's always a chance someone will try something again down the road. Keep your evidence organized and accessible." She'd been right about everything else, so I took her advice. The filing cabinet stayed, a paper monument to bureaucratic overreach and the importance of knowing your rights. The weeks turned into months, and life returned to normal. I worked my job as a software engineer, mostly from home, enjoying the view while I coded. I took the boat out regularly, fishing for northern pike and walleye, never worrying about permits or permissions because every fish I caught came from my water. Friends visited occasionally, and they all marveled at having a private lake. "You're living the dream," my buddy Marcus said one weekend while we grilled steaks on the deck. "Your own lake. No crowds, no noise, nobody telling you what you can and can't do." "It's nice," I agreed, though it came with more drama than I expected. "Yeah, but you won. That's what matters. That HOA lady tried to push you around and you pushed back harder." He wasn't wrong, but I didn't think of it as pushing back. I'd simply defended what was rightfully mine. The fact that it required lawyers and court battles and police reports was unfortunate, but sometimes that's what it takes. Winter came, and the lake froze solid. I cleared off sections for ice skating and set up a small warming hut near the shore. Kids from neighboring properties would sometimes stand at the edge of my land, watching me skate, probably wishing they could join. I felt a little guilty about that, but not guilty enough to open my property to the public. The whole point of buying this place was privacy and peace. In February, I received a letter from an attorney representing several Meadowbrook Estates residents. They were proposing a lease agreement where they would pay me an annual fee for limited lake access during summer months. The letter was polite and professional, acknowledging my property rights while suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. I thought about it for a day, then declined. The money would have been nice, but the headache wouldn't be worth it. Once I opened the door to shared access, even limited access, I'd be inviting all sorts of complications. Who could use it and when? What about liability if someone got hurt? What about noise and behavior issues? No thanks. The attorney called to follow up, trying to negotiate, but I was firm. I appreciate the offer, but the lake is private and it's staying that way. Nothing personal. I understand. My clients will be disappointed, but they respect your decision. Spring arrived, and I prepared the boat for another season. The repairs from Brenda's vandalism were invisible now, the hull pristine and perfect. I launched in April as soon as the ice was completely gone and spent a sunny Saturday afternoon cruising around my lake, music playing, not another soul in sight. This was why I'd bought this property, this moment, this freedom, this perfect solitude. No HOA could take that away from me, no matter how hard they tried. Richard Foster resigned from the HOA board in March, citing work commitments. He sent me a personal note thanking me for my patience during the transition and wishing me well. New board members took over, people I'd never met and had no connection to. The HOA continued its business, managing the common areas and dealing with actual community issues, but my name never came up in their meetings anymore. I'd been successfully forgotten, which was exactly what I wanted. In May, a for sale sign appeared at the entrance to Meadowbrook Estates, then another, and another. The bad publicity from Brenda's actions had lasting effects. People didn't want to live in a community with a dysfunctional HOA and a history of legal drama. Property values had dropped 15% according to the local real estate blogs I occasionally checked. I felt a little bad about that. The regular residents hadn't done anything wrong. They were just trying to live their lives, and they got caught up in their president's vendetta against me. But I couldn't control the market, and I certainly wasn't going to apologize for defending my property rights. One of the houses that sold was just down the road from me. The new owners, a couple in their 30s with 2 kids, stopped by to introduce themselves in early June. "Hi, I'm Nathan," I said, shaking hands with the husband. "Mark Wilson. This is my wife, Stephanie. We just moved in down the road. We wanted to meet the neighbors. Welcome to the area. How are you liking it so far?" Stephanie smiled. "It's beautiful. We love the space and the quiet. We heard there was some drama with the HOA last year." "Yeah, there was, but it's resolved now. The new board seems much more reasonable." Mark glanced toward the lake. "Is that your private lake? We heard about that. It's amazing that you own the whole thing." "It is. Came with the property when I bought it." "That must be incredible. Would you ever consider letting neighbors use it? We have 2 kids who love swimming and fishing." Here we go again, I thought, but Mark's tone was casual, not demanding. He was asking, not presuming. "I appreciate you asking," I said carefully, "but I bought this property specifically for the privacy. I keep the lake private. I hope you understand." "Totally," Mark said quickly. "No worries. We just thought we'd ask. There are plenty of public lakes around here anyway." Stephanie nodded. "We're not looking to cause any trouble. We heard what happened with the old HOA president. That was crazy." "It was definitely a learning experience," I said diplomatically. They chatted for a few more minutes, then headed back to their house. They seemed nice enough, and I appreciated that they'd respected my answer without argument. Maybe the new residents would be different from the ones who'd supported Brenda's crusade. Summer passed peacefully. I worked, I fished, I enjoyed my lake. No one bothered me. No violation notices appeared on my door. No HOA representatives showed up demanding compliance with imaginary rules. It was blissfully, wonderfully boring. In August, I got a call from a reporter at Minnesota Public Radio. They were doing a story on HOA overreach and had heard about my case. Would I be willing to be interviewed? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to just leave the whole thing in the past, but another part thought maybe sharing my story could help someone else dealing with similar issues. "Sure," I said. "I'll talk to you." The interview aired 2 weeks later. The reporter did a thorough job explaining the legal issues around property rights, HOA jurisdiction, and the limits of community association power. She interviewed me, Jennifer, and even got a quote from Judge Kowalski about the importance of respecting established property boundaries. The story got picked up by several news outlets and went semi-viral on social media. I received dozens of emails and messages from people across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were similar to mine, involving property disputes and overreach. Others were different but equally frustrating. Fines for wrong paint colors, demands to remove swing sets, threats over holiday decorations. The common thread was HO, as that forgot their purpose was to serve the community, not control it. Power-hungry board members who use their positions to bully and harass. Reasonable people driven to legal action just to maintain their basic property rights. I responded to as many messages as I could, offering encouragement and, when appropriate, recommending Jennifer as an attorney who understood property law and wasn't afraid to fight HOAs in court. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Colorado whose HOA was trying to claim jurisdiction over a creek running through her property. She'd bought the land specifically for the water rights, just like I had with my lake. The HOA was now insisting the creek was a community water feature and demanding she give public access. I wrote back immediately, sharing my entire experience and all the legal arguments that had worked for me. I connected her with Jennifer, who referred her to a property rights attorney in Colorado. 6 months later, she sent me an update. She'd won her case. The court ruled the HOA had no jurisdiction over her creek, and she'd been awarded damages for harassment. "Thank you for sharing your story," she wrote. "I don't know if I would have had the courage to fight back if I hadn't heard what you went through. You showed me it was possible to win." That made everything worthwhile. The stress, the legal fees, the anger and frustration, all of it was worth it if my experience could help someone else stand up for their rights. The second anniversary of my initial confrontation with Brenda came and went without incident. I marked the occasion by taking the boat out at sunrise, coffee in hand, enjoying the absolute peace of my private lake. 2 years ago, I'd been standing in almost this exact spot when Brenda's truck had rumbled down my driveway, intent on taking what wasn't hers. 2 years ago, I'd faced the very real possibility of a long, expensive legal battle with an uncertain outcome. But I'd fought back. I'd stood my ground. I'd defended my rights. And I'd won. The water was glass smooth that morning, reflecting the pink and gold sky perfectly. A blue heron stood in the shallows near the far shore, hunting for fish. An eagle circled overhead, riding the early thermals. This was my lake, my water, my property. Mine completely and legally and forever. No HOA could change that. No board president, no matter how determined or delusional, could take it away. The law was clear, the deed was ironclad, and Judge Kowalski's ruling was final. I finished my coffee as the sun climbed higher, turning the water from pink gold to brilliant blue. Another perfect day on my perfect lake. Brenda had tried to take this from me, tried to force me to share what was rightfully mine, tried to bend me to her will. She'd failed spectacularly. And I was still here, coffee in hand, boat gently rocking beneath my feet, enjoying every single drop of water that I owned. The lake stretched out around me, 42 acres of pristine Minnesota water, teeming with fish and wildlife, completely private and completely mine. I smiled, thinking about that day Brenda had shown up with her clipboard and her certainty that she could simply take what she wanted, because she was the HOA president. She'd learned the hard way that being an HOA president doesn't put you above the law. It doesn't give you the right to ignore court orders or vandalize property or sell access to things that don't belong to you. She'd learned that some people will fight back when pushed, will hire lawyers and go to court and refuse to back down. Most importantly, she'd learned that property rights matter. They're not just words on paper. They're fundamental protections that even the most determined busybody can't override. I started the boat's motor and headed out across the lake, enjoying the spray and the speed and the sheer freedom of it all. My lake, my rules, my peace. And nobody, Not Brenda Patterson, not the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, not anyone could ever take that away from me. The story could have ended badly. I could have backed down, paid the fines, moved my boat to avoid the hassle. Plenty of people do exactly that when faced with HOA pressure. It's easier, cheaper in the short term, less stressful. But then I'd be living on someone else's terms, following someone else's rules on my own property. I'd be tacitly accepting that an HOA could override my legal rights just because they said so. And that was something I couldn't do. Some fights are worth having, even when they're difficult. Some principles are worth defending, even when it costs money and time and peace of mind. Property rights are one of those principles. The right to enjoy what you've legally purchased, free from arbitrary interference, is fundamental. Brenda had forgotten that. The HOA had forgotten that. They'd gotten so caught up in their own authority, their own rules and regulations, that they'd forgotten they didn't actually have the power they thought they did. The court reminded them. Judge Kowalski's ruling was a clear message. HOAs have limits. They can't claim jurisdiction over property rights that predate their existence. They can't retroactively impose restrictions on legally established private property. And they definitely can't ignore court orders when those orders don't go their way. I circled the lake one more time, then headed back to the dock. I had work to do, code to write, deadlines to meet. But first, I'd enjoyed my morning on the water, on my water, in my boat, on my lake. Every single drop of it mine. That was the thought that had sustained me through all the harassment and legal battles. When Brenda had shown up that first morning demanding I remove my boat, when she'd sent those endless violation notices, when she'd violated the court order and vandalized my property through all of it, I'd held on to one simple truth. This was my lake. The deed said so. The survey said so. Minnesota water rights law said so. And eventually, Judge Kowalski said so too. I secured the boat to the dock and headed back to the house, the morning sun warm on my face. Inside, my computer waited, emails to answer and code to debug. Normal life, peaceful life, the life I'd bought this property to enjoy. No HOA could take that away from me. Not now, not ever. I'd made sure of that.